Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. The president of Iran and the foreign minister of Iran were killed in a helicopter crash. It is a dramatic moment for the people of Iran and indeed for the people of the region. One of the most important lessons to be learned is that it is not the president of Iran who has great power. It is the Grand Ayatollah. And therefore, I will tell you that I believe there will be no fundamental change in the policies of Iran. That means that the trouble that Iran has caused in the region and the agitation that it has maintained using its proxies, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others, make it clearer to me that we are going to face no real changes in the Middle East. I open with that, but I also want to talk for a moment about moral equivalency. The International Criminal Court is set to indict Benjamin Netanyahu, among other Israeli leaders, and evidently to show an even-handed policy, they are also going to indict some of the leaders of Hamas. This is hardly even-handedness. In fact, this is hypocrisy. There is no equation between what Israel has done and may do with what Hamas has done and continues to do. This is a travesty, and that is one of the reasons why there are real questions about what the international community feels and how the international community responds. But that should also leave us to question our own American system. Donald Trump's trials continue, and indeed, we now know that two Supreme Court justices are extremely compromised. Samuel Alito blamed his wife for an American flag being hoisted at his home, which was hoisted upside down, a feeling of distress after the January 6th insurrection. And of course, Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, still remains involved with far-right activities, including election denial. Now, let me try to put this in perspective. This is a travesty in the United States. These two Supreme Court justices should recuse themselves from any issue involving Donald Trump or the 2020 election. But you all understand, you cannot force a Supreme Court justice to recuse him or herself. And so the odds are that at least Alito and Thomas will defend Donald Trump to the very end. If they don't, I'll be very surprised. But I point this out because as we speak, Michael Cohen is on the witness stand in New York. He's being cross-examined. And before the end of the week, we may well have a verdict in the Donald Trump trial in New York. May I ask you a question? Do you believe that the office of the president should be held in higher regard? That a standard should be set for a president of the United States or a former president of the United States that is higher than one would normally encounter? I certainly believe that to be the case. And so that's another question which will have to be dealt with in the days and weeks ahead. Certainly the Republican Party is going to have to grapple with that question. Does it matter if someone who seeks the presidency or who has been president debases the office? Now, I began with Iran, I shifted to Donald Trump and the trials and tribulations which we now face when it comes to the Supreme Court. And you might ask, where is the consistency in all of this? The answer is clear. We do expect a higher standard of justice. It doesn't mean that justice always prevails. It doesn't mean that the right decision is always reached. But what it means is that we never lose sight of what that higher ideal should be. What worries me at this moment in the world, as condolences come into Iran on the death of their president and foreign minister, is anybody taking into account the horrific record that these two individuals had established over the years? Their hateful conduct? I don't think people take that into account. And what about our own actions here in the United States? Do we take into account, in our considerations, what our leadership does or says? That includes former presidents, current presidents, and of course, the Supreme Court of the United States. The end of the Supreme Court term is coming, and as it approaches, we are reminded that there is a major decision which will be made by the Supreme Court. That major decision has to do with whether or not a president of the United States can have, should have, the ability to have immunity. I am reminded of the words of former Chief Justice Burger, who said when Richard Nixon tried to apply a different standard to a president, the generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated specific need for the evidence in a pending criminal trial. Accordingly, the judgment under review is affirmed. And with that, Richard Nixon lost his battle for presidential immunity, as Donald Trump should lose his battle for presidential immunity. As we consider the state of the world, as we consider the death of an Iranian president who is known as the Butcher of Tehran because of what he did, what his actions have been, let us remember that we can put in context events that take place. But those contextual observations really matter only when push comes to shove, when decisions are made. And so, while all eyes are on what will happen in Iran, and all eyes are on the courtroom in New York, where a judgment may soon be rendered about Donald Trump, where all eyes are on the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is going to have to make critical decisions dealing with Donald Trump and the future of the American presidency, and the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court, which are two different bodies, and how they react in international situations. All of these things play out. So the question is, can we analyze them all? Can we talk about them all? Well, we try every day, right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman, to come up with answers to critical questions, to raise critical questions, and to ask you to consider, do we want to apply a higher standard? And if we do, what does that mean? Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which of course is our goal. You can interact with me on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I do want to extend a special note of appreciation to the wonderful producer of this podcast, Gogo Zoger. She makes sure that Around the Political World with John Rothman is up and running each and every day. I can't tell you what the world will be like tomorrow, but I can tell you, tune in. We'll try to cover it.